When I was a kid, my mom was a hippie and a feminist. We had only 2 rules. The first one was no Barbie dolls in the house. The second one was you absolutely cannot sing marketing jingles. So when I grew up, I became a marketer, and I marketed Barbie dolls. That was my first insight into how influence actually works. How many of you have small children? How many of you have girls ages 3 to 5? Some of us. I don't know if you let your girls play with Barbie dolls. That's the core target market for Barbies. We would ask these little girls, who's Barbie and what does she do? And they would tell us, Barbie's a bride and she gets married. So we took them at their word. We made Barbie as a bride with the dress, the groom, the wedding cake, and these bridal packages sold okay. But when we put on the anthropological market research hats, and we went to go see how girls actually played with Barbie dolls, which those of you who raised your hand are intimately familiar with, this is what it really looks like when Barbie gets married. She doesn't need a dress. She doesn't need a groom. You've got the family dog. Don't need a cake. Girls just use whatever is easily at hand, right? Now, when we would ask girls a little older, ages 7 to 9, who's Barbie and what does she do? Those girls say Barbie's a model and she wears fashionable clothes. So we took them at their word. We said, okay, great. Here's Barbie. Here's some clothes. Supposed to be cool. And these packages sold okay. Not as well as we expected, so putting on the anthropological market research hat, we go to their houses and see how they actually play with Barbie, which has nothing to do with fashion. She doesn't need clothes. She doesn't need hair. In many cases, she doesn't need a head. Girls, as girls got older, they were playing with her very differently, and they didn't trust us to tell us how they were actually playing with Barbie. And in fact, what I got to see as the market researcher in the focus group behind the two-way mirror, when the focus group facilitator would leave the room and girls are talking with each other, they would say things like, you know, when they invite you to come to one of these, you have to go or they'll put your parents in jail. So there's a big divide between what girls said and what they actually did. But it wasn't just the girls, it was actually also senior management. When I found that when I would present lots of carefully researched data and charts and analysis, here's what we should do with the new product line and here's why, I would get a lot of blank looks and stares, and sometimes management gets really excited and sometimes they just, no. And they would scrap the whole line, and they just had a gut feeling that we should do something completely different, and then my team would have half the time that we needed to make a whole new line. So I ended up going back to academia to study how people could make better, more rational decisions. It might not have taken you 5 years and getting a PhD to figure out we can never change people's minds. But if we understand how their minds work, then we can have a shot at influencing their behavior. And how their minds work and how we actually make decisions is way more like these guys than we would like to believe. This is a photo taken at Gatorland in Orlando. Anybody in this room been to Gatorland? A few of us? Okay, if you like gators, for Florida people, I know gators are not a big deal. I think they're kind of awesome. This is the gator capital of the world, so according to their marketing materials at least. They have thousands of gators, and you can go zip line over a gator-infested swamp where they filmed Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. You can feed alligators. And you can go to a pit of gators like this pile of beasts where you can toss a chunk of raw meat in. What I was expecting is that there is going to be this clash of the titans as they fight each other over the steak. But actually, gators are exactly the opposite. They are some of the laziest creatures on the planet. If you can land a tasty snack within their bite zone, between the nose and the tail, that one gator will snap it up so quickly you can hardly see it move. But if it's an inch outside, nobody moves. And they just sit there, and they wait for a bird to come down and eat it. Human beings are so much more like gators than we realize, because our primal decision-making system guides most of our behavior, if you believe it can be quantified. It's about 90% of our behavior is guided unconsciously. And you should be skeptical anytime you hear numbers like that. But it is a lot. And that system that we use to unconsciously be scanning the environment for threats and opportunities is in play 100% of the time, and we only rarely use our conscious mind. You may be familiar, some of you, with the lens of behavioral economics. You might have heard of Danny Kahneman, who's won a Nobel Prize, or Richard Thaler, who's won a Nobel Prize in behavioral economics. Very briefly, the fundamental precept of behavioral economics, which is so helpful for understanding decision-making. I'm going to use an analogy that's friendly to our gator brain. Behavioral economists will call it System 1 and System 2. System 1, I call it the gator brain. This is the unconscious, intuitive, automatic, and fast decision-making system. This system can multitask, can do many, many things at once. Any kind of decisions or behavior that becomes habitual, we don't have to use our conscious mental resources to do it. It's our System 1 gator brain. As influencers, that is the system that we have to influence, get people interested, before trying to make a rational argument. This was the mistake that I was making when I was just starting with trying to influence the judge, which is System 2. This is the conscious, slow, deliberate, effortful decision-making system, which can only focus on one thing at a time. The biggest mistake that I see smart, nice influencers making with the people that we work with customers, and especially internally, and especially when we're trying to influence people that we work with or leadership or our colleagues, is that we assume that we have their attention and we assume that they're going to make the decision rationally before we try to influence their visceral decision-making system. Would you like to see, this is kind of abstract, would you like to get an experience of what it feels like to have your gator brain and the judge in conflict? Should we do that? Okay. This is called, it's a little fun, I think it's fun because I'm a nerd. It's a task called the Stroop test, and the directions are just these. Out loud, everybody together, say each word. Go. Perfect. You can read. Now, instructions are just say the color the word is printed in out loud. Everybody together, go. Okay. Isn't that weird? What just happened there is you got to experience your gator brain can read, because reading has become habitual. You don't have to use any mental resources at all to process words in your own native language. But your gator brain is not used to just saying the color that the word is printed in because it doesn't have any practice. So your initial reaction is read, and then you have the judge second-guessing the color. And if that would become habitual, then you could do that with your gator brain as well. What I travel the world encouraging people to do is to consider, before using facts, figures, rational arguments, to make a plan for how are you going to influence the gator brain. Because I come from marketing, I use a lot of marketing examples, but what we're talking about is psychology that's so fundamental that this is applicable with anyone you're trying to influence. So this is with the employees you work with, trying to engage and enroll them and get them excited about and participating in learning and development programs, including influencing CEO and everyone you have to get on your side for new resources, new programs, even including yourself, your kids, and your family and your friends. So I will ask you, please, if you find one thing during this session that you feel like maybe you could use or that's an insight, just please write it down or take a picture. So just have a phone or a pad of paper ready. And the 3 questions the gator brain will ask that we're going to address, fundamental questions, are, is it a threat? This is a survival mechanism, right? Because the biggest task for our most primal brain is survival. Second question is, can I ignore it? And that's because gators, real alligators, have brains the size of a teaspoon running a 1,000-pound body. They are super lazy, like I said. They only actually eat about 5 pounds of meat per month. They're just opportunistic lurkers waiting for something that is important enough to take action on. And in the human being's case, take action on it means kick it up to the judge. But almost everything, not important enough for that, because judge can only handle one case. And the third question is just, can I handle it? So reading, as an example, gator brain can handle the reading, can go ahead and take it. Gator brain can drive, right? If you're used to commuting to work, say in a car, and you want to remember to make a stop on the way home, does it happen to you sometimes that all of a sudden, there you are at your house, and you didn't even realize the whole drive? Because your gator brain was in full-on automatic mode. So we'll talk about 3 forces and strategies for each one. The first one is ease, which is related to the gator question, can I handle it? Ease, the power of ease cannot be overestimated. And none of this is rocket science. I'm sharing it with you, even though you know these things are important and you do use them. I'm 100% sure you don't realize how important they are, and you could use them more and more strategically. Rule number 1, gators are lazy. And it's rule number 1 because it's the most important. Here's an example. In the domain of organ donation, whether you're an organ donor or not, you probably have a pretty strong preference. Maybe you think it's really important for everybody to register to be organ donors because if you're not going to live, it would be great if your life would be more useful for somebody else to live a little bit longer. Or perhaps you are not an organ donor. It's fine for other people to do it, and that's great. But if there is any possible chance that you're going to be, say, taken off life support and your organs harvested, definitely really important not to be an organ donor. It turns out the biggest factor in determining who's an organ donor and who's not an organ donor is just how easy it is to be an organ donor or not be an organ donor. This is a study of many European countries. It just happens in European nations, about half of them have opt-in policies where no one's an organ donor by default, but you check a box to be an organ donor. Half of them have opt-out policies where everyone is an organ donor by default, but you can just check a box to opt out. Checking a box is as easy as it gets to make a decision, right? But check out the rates of organ donation determined almost entirely by, do you have an opt-in program or do you have an opt-out program? In behavioral economics, the default effect, which this is illustrating, is the strongest effect out of all of the biases and heuristics and anomalies that researchers study. So if you have an opportunity, the application is limited, right? You have limited opportunities to make something the default, but when you do, this is tremendously powerful. People, most of the time, think about motivation and what drives behavior in terms of pleasure and pain. And I am here today to tell you what is much bigger factor in driving behavior is what's easy. I claim And I would love to have you argue with me after with counterexamples. But think about if there's a company that you can think of which has disrupted not just their competitors, but the entire industry that they play in. My hypothesis is it's almost certain that that company has innovated on the dimension of ease and made it easier to do business than it was before. A few examples. One would be Amazon. Almost all of Amazon's innovation have been on the dimension of ease. First, there's one-click shopping. Well, first is just you push a button and something appears at your house, right? One-click shopping. Now there's Alexa. Soon there are going to be drones. Uber, easier to get a ride with Uber than to get a taxi. And in many cases, for many people, now it's easier to get an Uber than to even own a car. And if you've been dating in the past few years, you may have signed up for Tinder, which makes it easier than ever to get a date, right? There's none of this trade-offs that you have to make between looking at all these profiles. There's income and religion and what music do they like, how far away do they live, how hot are they? No, Gator Brain just says swipe, 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 super easy, right? Okay, maybe it could be a little bit easier. If you're not picky. Domino's innovated in 2015 with the Domino's Anywhere campaign, where they said, what we care about most is making it as easy as possible to order a pizza. They also had a big data insight where they realized that many, many, many of their customers were ordering the same pizza to the same address. They said, okay, great, that's your favorite pizza, favorite address. If you want to get that, you can just tweet us an emoticon or text us an emoticon of a pizza, and like magic poof, it shows up at your house. And you can order on your Apple Watch, or of course you can call us. They even had a deal with Ford. You can order pizza from your car. What happened that year was Domino's increased their market share. While their biggest competitor was losing market share, Domino's made it so easy to order a pizza that they grew market share for pizza out of everything that you eat. So it wasn't just taking market share away, but actually encouraging people to eat more pizza. So I know you're probably not selling pizza. I'm just sharing these examples to spark, hopefully, some inspiration for you. How can you make it easier? A question that you could ask, or you could just take this to heart in terms of how important it is to make things easy, is the customer effort score. This is the most underutilized marketing metric. If you look at what predicts customer loyalty and also increased spending, it's no surprise that customer satisfaction predicts both. It should. It would be crazy if it didn't. Many large companies, and I'm going to guess probably yours, uses Net Promoter Score, which is word of mouth, which is just asking how likely are you to recommend our product or service to a friend. And what predicts even more than both of these, loyalty and spending, is customer effort score. And it's just one question. It's just how much effort did you personally have to put forth? This is a question that you could ask the people that you do business with, and you could also just take it to heart and know what you need to do. What this tells us is we need to make it as easy as possible for anyone to do business with us, and to say yes to whatever we're trying to influence them to do. One company's super office is just a quick example. They're a Scandinavian customer relationship management software company where, like they have the challenge that they're trying to influence people who need to influence other people. And I know a lot of us need to do that. So they just give their customers templates to say, hey, plug in all of your data so you can share this deck with your boss. Another template that I received attending another marketing conference was this letter template for a lot of us in the room needed to convince our bosses to get funding to travel to this conference. And so these conference organizers created a template where you just plug in total cost of this much money. Here are the projects or initiatives I think this conference might help us out with. What tools could you empower the people you're trying to influence to use when they're influencing the people that they need to influence? How can you make it even easier for your employees, for your senior leadership, for your customers? How can you make it easier? And how can you make it easier for employees to engage in your learning and development programs, also getting their attention, but as easy as possible to take action? Let's talk about attention. Second question we said the gator brain asks is, can I ignore this thing? Because we ignore most stuff. There's just too much going on in the world. So we have to never, ever take attention for granted. This is just a visual representation of what our experience looks like. Lots and lots and lots of competition for our attention. The gator brain is influenced especially by visuals and emotions. And this is why we use graphs when we're presenting data, because gator brain responds to graphs. And this particular graph is an analysis of 1,400 ad campaigns in the UK, where the researchers were just curious which works better, a rational appeal, which would be a judge appeal, an emotional appeal, which would be a gator appeal, or both. And what they found was emotional appeals were much more profitable, not just than rational appeals, but that combining the gator appeal and the judge appeal actually didn't help. Now, whether it's going to help to add both of these or not is going to depend on your situation, and I hope that you're going to do some research yourself and some experiments, but I'm sharing this to show it's not always better to have both together. Another example of using visuals and emotions, which I found particularly interesting, was in a hand washing study done in a hospital in New England, where hand washing in hospitals is so important. In the United States, 100,000 people die every year because of hospital spread infections. Doctors are smart, rational people. They know this data because people trying to get them to wash their hands share this data. However, they just aren't thinking about it when they're going, especially when they're going to visit their patients, say, post-op. They'll wash before surgery, but not going to visit their patients afterwards. So what these researchers did was they invited physicians to a room like this. They fed them lunch, told them a bunch of data, and then as the doctors are leaving the room, they say, thank you very much. And they have these plates of agar-agar, and they ask the doctors to put their hand in the bacterial in this plate of agar-agar that they're going to develop so that the doctors can see, here's what your own handprint looks like after lunch. That's what's on your hands. And the researchers also put these images on posters with the doctors' names on it. And they put these images as the screensavers on your own computer. It increased hand washing from 80% to 100%. Visceral influences, even of smart, rational people. So that's one of the messages I want to leave everybody with is that it's not that there's some people who are influenced in this visceral, emotional, irrational way. It's all of us. This is why advertisers like to use emotions and surprise. One of the visceral influences related to attention that we don't consider how powerful it is timing. And timing is important even for smart, rational people like, say, doctors or judges. Actual judges are the people we determine to be the most rational, objective professionals to deliberate carefully on the most objective outcomes, right? But what it turns out, the judges are just as influenced by their gator brain as the rest of us. And some researchers in Israel noticed this pattern where at the beginning of the day, when a prisoner comes up for parole, they have about a 2/3 likelihood of getting to go home and be free. But this number goes down till it's 0, and then it jumps up again, dwindles, jumps up again, and dwindles. At the end of the day, in these other 2 troughs, all of the prisoners are getting sent back to jail. What's going on with those spikes? I heard some people say, yeah, break. It's just a lunch break. That's it. What happens is the judge, which I said, it's conscious, deliberate, effortful. It takes a lot of mental resources to make hard decisions. So when you have a lot of mental resources, you can make the hard decision to send a prisoner out into society and make the tough choice. It's a calculated risk I'm willing to make. However, when you've made lots of decisions and you're distracted, you're tired, you're hungry, then you make the easy choice of, yeah, no, back to jail. If even judges are influenced by their gator brain, it's all of us who are influenced by our gator brains. Here's another example of timing. When you're thinking about the people that you're trying to influence, when are they going to be most receptive to what it is that you want to talk about, or most receptive to you? Procter & Gamble uses timing as a key force in all of their marketing plans. And this example is from the Procter & Gamble Bonux laundry detergent marketing team in Beirut, who was tasked with figuring out how can we influence people when they are most likely to care about laundry detergent. And when we care most about laundry detergent, well, we don't care about laundry detergent, right? We just don't care. But when we would be most receptive, I guess it's when we're doing laundry, right? And in Beirut, people do their laundry, washing machine, and then they hang it out to dry on the balcony. They don't have dryers. So if you are trying to influence them at that moment with a marketing message, well, TV advertising doesn't help because they're doing laundry, right? And it also is not going to help to have, say, magazine ads or print ads, radio ads. I don't know. They're kind of busy. They're doing laundry. But this marketing team realized they could get their customers' attention. Here's a knockoff of that campaign by the Career Builder job search website. Timing. Now, if you hate your job, are you really standing on the ledge? Probably no. However, if you can get people's attention with humor, this ad was shared virally so that it actually did reach a lot of people when they were hating their job, because what do we do when we hate our job? We're surfing the web. So they did come across it. I just wanted to introduce this next ad is my favorite marketing campaign from the past few years, which is Cathay Pacific Airlines using timing and attention to reach customers or potential customers in Hong Kong who might want a beach vacation. Think about how timing played a role in this campaign, and also what else did it take to have this campaign be so successful? that campaign. You don't have to be creative. I just want to show you some creative examples to spark your creativity and so that you can figure out how you might apply this in your own situation. So this campaign, obviously timing's important because it's monsoon season when customers would be most likely to want to go on a beach vacation, but it's not just monsoon season, it's when it's actually raining and it's grabbing their attention where they're looking, right? You're not looking at billboards when it's raining, you're looking down at the sidewalk to make sure that you don't step in a puddle. And it's not just getting their attention at the right time, but allowing them to take action in that moment when their attention has been grabbed, so they have the QR code. So for yourself, when you're thinking about how to use timing, think about when will this person or this group potentially be most receptive, and how can I help them take action in that moment if it's possible. Sometimes it won't be possible. Ideally, you won't have them tasked with remembering from when you got them all excited to when they take action. But here's one tool you could use if there's a lag time, which is called implementation intentions. And this is I would say it's probably the most successful behavior change tool that researchers have found. And there have been many, many, many studies and many initiatives using implementation intentions, which is super easy, super simple. It's creating an attentional trigger, asking people, okay, that thing that you want to do, how are you going to do it? How are you going to implement your intention? One example is a Get Out the Vote campaign. In 2008, Barack Obama's campaign was the first national campaign that used implementation intentions in their Get Out the Vote efforts. And in this situation, the questions that they asked people who had already said they want to vote, they just asked, where's your polling station? Do you know, when are you going to vote, and how are you going to get there? Asking those questions, when are you going to vote, and how are you going to get there, creates an attentional trigger, where if you say, I'm going to vote on Tuesday morning on my way to work, then your gator brain goes bing when it's Tuesday morning and you're on the way to work. You can also create a plan B attentional trigger by asking whoever you're trying to influence, okay, and what if that doesn't pan out? What's your plan B? And you could create a second attentional trigger that says, okay, if lines are too long or I oversleep or whatever, I'm going to vote on my way home from work. Okay, great, another attentional trigger. In these campaigns, in all of the markets where they used implementation intentions, the increase in voting was 4 to 9%, which doesn't sound like a heck of a lot for some campaigns, but overall, the increase for any Get Out the Vote campaign is 0.037%. 4 to 9% was enough to swing 4 of the swing states. So I don't know if this was the only thing. I mean, when I say only thing, I'm sure it was not the only thing responsible for Obama's win in 2008. However, it played enough of a role that all national campaigns in the US now use implementation intentions. This is something that you can use with yourself as well. So when you are leaving this conference, or at any time, when there's something that you want to take home and implement, ask yourself and write it down, when and where and how are you going to use that thing that you've learned or gotten excited about at this conference? What's the next step? When, where, how are you going to do it? And if you want, if that doesn't work, then what's your plan B? Here's a study that I ran at Google. This is a field study where I was looking at attention and ease. And I don't know how many of you have visited Google, but Google is this, you may have heard, this cornucopia of culinary delights where employees, every employee at the company, by policy mandate, has free food within 150 feet at all times. This is a great perk. Employees love it, but they also complain. So Google employees call themselves Googlers. New Google employees are called Nooglers. And they complain about the Noogler 15 which is like the freshman 15 when you go to college. The people gain weight when they start working at Google. And the favorite snack, most popular, is M&Ms. So Google asked me and some of my colleagues to come in and help them out to figure out, we don't want to prohibit people from eating these tasty snacks. We just want to help them implement their intention to do a little less mindless snacking. So we were looking at mindless snacking behavior. And one of the things that we checked out was how M&Ms were served and what signage was displayed. And in these break rooms, you had M&Ms in bulk containers that you could scoop into a cup. And then there was a label that said serving size 1.74 ounces. There are lots of engineers at Google, but even an engineer, like, what's 1.74 ounces of M&Ms? Like, who knows, right? So what I did was ran a study in 3 different break rooms with different signs and one of them with different portions. So trying numeric serving size. Serving size is 8 pieces of peanut M&Ms. That's pretty clear, right? In another cafe, another break room, visual serving size, just showing them, okay, in this cup, this is how much one serving is of peanut M&Ms. And then in the third cafe, instead of the bulk M&Ms, we just served portions like Halloween candy fun pack size. We asked people to predict which of these, if any, do you think will be effective in reducing mindless snacking? And here's what people said. They said, I think if I knew the number of M&Ms, I would probably eat a bit less of them. And if I saw the visual serving size, that would be more effective, because I'm actually not going to really count my M&Ms. But this would be really, really easy for me to understand, very gator brain friendly, right? And some people said I would eat less if they were in portions, and some people were like, I think I'd kind of stuff a lot into my purse. What we found was no effect at all of the number serving size label. Also no effect of the visual serving size label. But there was a big reduction with the fun pack smaller portions. I'm sharing this because we were looking at both attention and ease, but the mistake that I made as a researcher was taking their attention for granted. They paid no attention to the signs. They just did what was easy. Disregarded the signs. It's easiest to fill a cup if you have a cup, and it's easiest to take one pack if you have them in smaller packages. It's actually mentally more difficult to think, how many packs do I want to take, than to just take one pack. So the moral of this ease and attention part is, number one, ease trumps attention. Number two, you can never take attention for granted. The question for you is, when you are trying to influence people, when and how will you get their attention? Just think about this strategically before your next influence attempt. And this is the depressing part. It's not really depressing, but it's frustrating for those of us who are trying to influence people, which is, from the gator brain perspective, gator brain's number one job is scanning the environment for threats. And every time you are trying to influence someone, you're a threat, a potential threat. You are a threat to, even if it's just their attention, or to their time, or to their social capital. Sometimes it will be their money. And many, many times you're a threat to their autonomy. The gator brain hates to be told what to do. We just hate being, like when I shared with you, I was prohibited from playing with Barbies and becoming a marketing person, right? My gator brain is like, there's my career path. This is the most famous graph in behavioral economics, and it's illustrating what's called prospect theory. And the basic message of prospect theory is losses loom larger than gains. We feel a loss much more keenly than we feel a gain. And you know this from when you get feedback right? When you get 360 feedback or when you get feedback from your boss, you hear lots of great things, and they just kind of go in one ear and out the other, and then you hear one piece of criticism and it just, it cuts, right? Bad is stronger than good. It's not bad, that's just how it is, and it makes a lot of sense. It needs to be that way for us to survive. We have to be keenly aware of all of the risks and all of the threats so that we're not going to make a mistake. In the brain, what researchers find is that the brain processes threats to our beliefs in the same way as threats to our physical safety. And you probably know that the fear center in our brain is called the amygdala. And the amygdala gets activated every time there's a threat. And the amygdala is also what gets activated, for example, if you have a fear of public speaking, which most of us do, and it's like going on. Our brains process threats and rewards the same, whether it's physical or whether it's psychological. When researchers will study influence, if you're trying to influence somebody's beliefs that they don't hold very strongly, those are processed in the prefrontal cortex, which is where we make our rational decision. Like, let's say, lots of you, I'm going to guess, have a belief because you've been taught that George Washington had wooden false teeth. Have you heard this at least? Okay, it turns out that's not true. He did have false teeth, but forensic dentists have studied them because they still exist, and they're made of hippopotamus, ivory, and donkey teeth, not wood. Okay, and your prefrontal cortex is now just updating. Oh, okay, George Washington's false teeth were not made of wood. It's not threatening, right? Now, if I challenge a belief that some of you hold dearly, which is that learning styles, being visual or auditory or kinesthetic, have a strong influence on how people learn and how we should be teaching people, and on memory and retention. We should teach visual learners with visuals, auditory learners by speaking, kinesthetic learners by doing. If I tell you there is actually no evidence to support that, research finds that is not true, now there are a bunch of you whose amygdala is going wrong, 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 and prefrontal cortex is now going to look for excuses or reasons or counter-arguments, and you're going to go away and you are going to look up. Your confirmation bias is going to have you looking up evidence that what you believe is true rather than looking up something like learning styles debunked, which will show you all of the research that truly, I'm telling you, research really says learning styles don't help people learn. And you'll also find the nuanced explanations of if you ask people about how they like to learn and they're reflecting on themselves as learners, they pay more attention and they do retain more. It's just that it's not about their learning style. This is just an illustration of gator brain hates being told what to do. We resist. We also feel very emotionally violated when some person or some company doesn't live up to our expectations, and it's very hard to let go of those emotions. And if we have visual evidence, it's much stronger. United Airlines last year, when Dr. Dow gets dragged off a plane, and this is all over national media, and then this is made worse by the CEO's really tone-deaf response saying, I apologize for having to re-accommodate these customers. Oi, we hate this guy, right? And there's a huge movement to boycott United, and they can never use this tagline again. Since 1968, they've invested tens of millions of dollars. They've violated this completely. We see memes like this. Like this. However, check out what happens to the stock price. When Dr. Dow is dragged off, well, at first people aren't realizing, and then you see this huge dip when the news hits. So in the immediate aftermath, investors are predicting a loss for United, but then it creeps back up. And this is because it is hard to boycott United. It's not easy, and in that moment, when you might be so upset by what you've seen United doing, and this is also going on last week or the week before with the puppy, right? United again. And we all want to boycott United because who would be so stupid and cold-hearted as to kill a puppy in the overhead bin? But if you're not buying a ticket in that moment, then you have to remember from that moment of decision and visceral influence to when you're actually buying a ticket. But also, if you think about the airline industry, you've only got a couple of options. And are you really going to make yourself suffer by taking a connecting flight just to avoid United, right? So this is illustrating, even though the visceral influence is so strong and people wanted to boycott Uber, ends up having no effect because ease is more important than motivation. Here's a counterexample. Similar period last year, this was in January, when there's a Muslim ban, and at JFK Airport, taxi drivers are boycotting, not giving rides to people arriving at JFK, and at this moment in time, Lyft takes the opportunity to make a political statement supporting their drivers and their customers. Uber, on the other hand, doesn't, and significantly doesn't, and they also implement surge pricing so that it's extra expensive to take an Uber. So there is a delete Uber, hashtag delete Uber movement. And what happens in this case is that 200,000 people end up deleting the app. This is very different from the response to United. But it makes sense if you think about it again from the ease perspective, which is that it is so easy to delete Uber from your phone in that moment where you care so much about it. It's also really easy to install Lyft. And they're really replaceable, right? Interchangeable. And once you've deleted Uber, so it's not just a boycott, right? That's why delete Uber was important. And people were encouraging each other to post the screenshots that I just showed you that said deleting Uber. When you've deleted Uber, then it becomes way easier to use Lyft than to reinstall Uber. And Uber has now done a lot of things trying to get customers back. Some of those are working, but every time they screw something up and there's another delete Uber campaign, they really use a lot of business compared to United. Here's an example of how I challenge my students to build trust with people who disagree with them. And this is something that you might use if you felt like it with your teams, in your leadership programs. And I'm just going to give you a sample of it right now. So choose somebody next to you to be a partner. Make sure they know that they're your partner. Okay, and if you have a group of 3, that's fine. But 2 of you will get to speak. This challenge is what I use with my students to be able to talk across the divide. So we have such a big divide politically right now, but the divide is between us and anyone who disagrees with us fundamentally on an issue that we care about. Because when we hear somebody arguing against us, this is where our amygdala is going zzz, 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 and we can't even hear what they're saying. My guess is that you've never won an argument, because arguments don't get won. And you can think about this when you get in a fight with your significant other, and you're like, oh, and then this, and then this, and then this, and you've got truth on your side, but they are not freaking listening to you. And you are also not freaking listening to them, because you're waiting to speak and make your good argument. So the challenge of trust building across the divide, which you can use also with your significant other, and the empathy challenge is to have an intention, first to listen, and to have an intention when you listen. And I challenge people to listen for the other person's values. And you can actually do this with just about any question at all. And to illustrate this, I'm just going to ask whoever in your group is going to go first. Make sure your partners know that you're going to go first. Okay? And now, you realize that you volunteered to go first in a listening exercise, right? So you are going to listen first. Oh, were you not listening? So who's going first? You will listen, and your intention is to hear the other person's unstated values. And you are going to just ask that other person, so what brought you to this conference? You can use this with small talk. You could also ask them about some deeply held belief that they disagree with you on, but I don't know what that's going to be in your partner pair, right? So just be listening. What are their values? When you just ask what brought them to this conference, you have 1 minute. Go. Okay, pause. Just really briefly, listener, reflect what values you heard, and talkers, if that's not exactly right, just tell them. What is the deeper value that they didn't hear? Just 30 seconds, go. Okay, pause. Pause. This could be the start of a really interesting conversation, right? Listening for somebody's values is a beautiful way to get to know someone, and it's a beautiful way to cross the divide. And generally, just the fact that you're trying to understand them and that you care about what they care about is enough, and it's really okay if you're not entirely accurate. And if you would like to have these conversations, again, at the end, I encourage you to, so you who got to talk in this exercise, afterward, please just take 1 minute and try this with you asking any question at all that you want of your partner and seeing if you can tell in 1 minute what it is that person cares about. See if you can make a guess. The last strategy, that's a specific strategy I want to share with you, is my favorite influence strategy, which I call it the magic question. Nobody else calls it that because I don't know other people that teach this specific one. But I call it the magic question because it works so much more effectively than we would expect. And to illustrate, I'll tell you a story so you can get some emotional markers to retain this idea. This was a story told for a different reason by Gloria Steinem when she came to New Haven last year. Gloria Steinem, you might be familiar with her. She's an American feminist. She's been an activist for decades. And she was telling us about when she went on a trip to Africa where the issue of concern was sex trafficking of girls. She had been talking to a lot of people, doing a lot of reading, speaking herself as an expert. And rather than going and telling people what they should do to solve this problem, she asked the magic question. In a particular village she told us about in Zambia, she sits down with the village elders, and 3 girls in that village had been sold by their parents in the previous year to sex traffickers. And she asks these village elders, what would it take for those 3 girls not to have left the village in that way? And they told her an electric fence. An electric fence? They said, the elephants are trampling our crops of corn, and we don't have anything to eat. These girls, they were starving. So Gloria Steinem goes back to the States. She raises a few $1,000s. She sends it to this village so they can put up an electric fence. She comes to visit again 3 years later, and the way she describes it, there's singing, there's dancing, there's a bumper crop of corn, and no girls have left the village in that way since they got the fence. The magic question is, what would it take? It's a magic question because, first of all, it empowers the other party as the expert they are. It builds trust. They are the expert on their own situation. If you had been studying this problem like Gloria Steinem had, you would never, ever, ever have come up with a solution of an electric fence, right? At the same time, it shifts the other party from a judgment and decision-making mode to a problem-solving and collaboration mode. And thirdly, it implicitly has the other party committing to the outcome after they give you the roadmap. If these things happen, they are committed to whatever it was that you're looking for. In this case, it's the village elders, when they say what it will take is an electric fence. It's not that magically an electric fence keeps the girls in the village, but after they have committed to what we need is an electric fence, then the elders also take action and make sure that no girls are going to leave the village now that they have an electric fence. You can use what would it take with your employees, with your bosses, with anybody, just asking them to find out because they are the experts. And this is a beautiful question for handling trust and the gator brain when you anticipate resistance. So to recap, gator brain's questions are, is it a threat? Can I ignore it? Can I handle it? And how you woo a gator is you give it something to eat. If you are a super nerd and you'd like some future reading on influence and the brain, take a picture of these. Michael Lewis's book is about Kahneman and Tversky, and it's a much easier read to understand behavioral economics than Danny Kahneman's 800-page book, although both are brilliant. Brain Rules is by a neuroscientist who studies pedagogy, and because you care about learning, if you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it. And Pitch Anything is written by a VC money guy applying gator brain principles specifically to presentations. So if you coach people on presentations, I would recommend that one. So my question for you, what will it take for you to put into action what you're learning at the Chief Learning Officer Symposium? And I would love to, I would love to hear how it goes. And here's my information. You're welcome to contact me. Thank you. I did not take your attention for granted, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.